Well, it's indeed a pleasure to have you here, Spencer. We've been working on this for a couple of months. So I want to start off with one thing, though. We've had two people inside the executive chair so far. We had Travis Sessions from Biomerics. He was our inaugural speaker or guest. And then we had Randy Shumway last week. And I wanted to mention Randy Shumway because I made a note of something. He knew that you were going to be in the chair today. And he said this, and we really like this. He says, Spencer is one of the finest human beings I know. And so it's indeed a pleasure to have you.
That's very nice, especially coming.
Good. Well, as we do, it is customary for inside the...
Yeah, it's, I didn't turn it. No, that's what they teach you first day of MBA school. I must have missed that day.
Is that good?
That's better. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, let's start over. Take two. I'll try not to move.
Do I need to repeat the pleasantries?
No, it's okay.
He is one of the finest human beings, though, as Randy pointed out.
Can you say it one more time, just so it cost me a lot of money, and so I'd like to hear it the third time. But.
What is customary with, for those who are familiar with Inside the Actors Studio, this is patterned after that series. And one of the first things that we do is go through what we call kind of rapid fire questions. Feel free to elaborate on these so as we go through. Where were you born?
I was born in Boise, Idaho.
Boise, Idaho.
St. Luke's. Any Boise people here? No, okay. They're still trying to see. Good stock coming from Boise.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up, most of my life, I grew up in Salt Lake.
And what was your father's name?
Spencer.
And your mother's name?
Cleone.
And your father's profession?
He was a banker, or is a banker. I don't think he ever gave that up. And then a number of other things too, but mainly that.
And your mother's profession?
She was a school teacher, but then she was also a mom, which was the toughest job. If you're just looking at me, you can see it was tough.
And how many siblings then?
I have 3 older sisters, but I'm supposed to say they're 3 younger sisters now, for obvious reasons.
You've got some colleagues here in the audience?
Yeah, I do. Good to see you.
What were your greatest lessons learned from your father and your mother, respectively?
Okay, so from my father, I think he has a certain intensity about him, but one thing that I learned, 2 or 3 things. One is he just has a way of connecting with people, and he loves getting to know everybody, and he treats everybody the same way, whether it's the person cleaning or the person that's a senior executive on his executive team. So by the time, sometimes when you go out to eat, you're like, okay, maybe we can talk together now, because we now know where the waitress went to high school and how many kids they have and what dreams they have and aspirations. But that's just who he is. So he's very friendly. He's extremely loyal and hardworking, and his integrity is probably kind of the crowning component of him.
So he's able to dive deep into people's lives and really care about people.
Yes.
What about your mother?
My mom, she's a pure saint. And so she has pure compassion, empathy, and there's nobody, she will never put herself in front of anybody. She always puts other people first and has a concern for them. So
that's great. Who was your hero or some of your heroes growing up?
So it sounds trite, but I would start with my mom and dad. Heroes growing up would also include some of the folks in my ancestors. My grandfather, because when he was the oldest of about 7 kids, and he was ready to go to college, and his father passed away. And he put every one of his kids through, every one of his siblings through college, and has instilled in our family the importance of getting an education. And then my great-great-grandfather, William Eccles, that came across on the Perpetual Immigration Fund, he was a blind woodworker, and he, at some point in life, they were able to fix that. He had cataracts. And he only allowed them to fix one eye. And his mantra, or his motto was, if somebody should be blind, why shouldn't it be me? So he was a man of great humility. We talk a lot about David Eccles, and he did some incredible things and really set things in motion, but we don't talk a lot about William. And then, of course, I think my grandfather and Mariner Eccles and George Eccles, those guys, at 22, Mariner took over the family and really taught everybody how to kind of keep things together, how to give back, and he was a great businessman.
That's fantastic. I think we'll get into a little bit about the importance of ancestry a little bit later, and I'd love to hear more about some of those individuals. What were your interests growing up?
Well, I just always wanted to be like my dad, and he was a ski racer, and so that was kind of a natural thing for me. And so I wanted to compete. I wanted to be better than him. I wanted to ski for the University of Utah. I wanted to ski for the national team, and I wanted to ski for the Olympics. And a component of that was I loved all sports, and I did a lot of sports. I was very small for my age, I guess, and so I played football from a very young age, and I did everything I possibly could. I dabbled in everything from gymnastics to baseball to soccer to dance to anything that could help my skiing. I did that.
And did you ever have competition with your dad in terms of skiing?
Yes, and I can tell you exactly where I was when I beat him.
Where were you?
We were in Sun Valley, Idaho. It was Christmas time. I think I was about 12, and it was a great day for me. It's a great day. I think it was not so good for him, but that's the way life goes.
That always happens. There's a point when dads realize that their kids are going to beat them.
Yeah.
What high school did you attend?
So I had a very unique high school background. I went to Skyline for the fall and the spring, and then I skied at Roland Hall, St. Mark's, Romark Ski Academy in their inaugural years. And so the 2 winter semesters I would go to Roland Hall, and then on the shoulders I would go to Skyline, and then I graduated from Skyline. And one of the reasons for that was because we just felt my folks felt it was really important to be with my friends. I had 9 guys that were in my neighborhood that were my age, and they were a great influence on me, and we felt that was important.
And did you also ski with them consistently?
With my friends, well, I had these two buckets of friends, one at Skyline and one at Roland Hall, and those friends at Roland Hall were the guys that I ski raced with, and I still stay in touch with them, and they've all gone on to do great things, actually.
Fantastic. What college did you attend?
Is this being recorded? Okay. I attended the University of Utah, and I also went to BYU. But nobody in my family knows that, so please kind of keep it to yourself. But in all honesty, I went to the University of Utah and got a history degree there, and then I went to BYU to get my MBA, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So I was grateful for both of those.
So the key question then, BYU or the U of U?
And I think we're talking about game day, and game day I'm always a U of U fan.
Good to know.
No offense to anybody in this room.
What are some of your favorite books?
Just recently, and I don't know why it took me so long to get to it, but I just recently, and you referenced this in some of your questions, Clayton Christensen's book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And that was just phenomenal. And the other book that I got a tremendous amount of just recently also was the book Unbroken, the Louis Zamperini story. It's about, you make a plan in your life and nothing goes according to plan, but yet what you do with your life, and maybe more important, when you look back, what you see is critical. And that is it's just Unbroken. If you have not read that, it is an incredible book. You should read that, including Clayton's book.
That leads us into this next portion. So one of the hallmark teachings of Clayton Christensen is around strategy. And that there are really 2 strategies. One, an intended or deliberate strategy, and then an emergent strategy. For many in the room pursuing their executive MBA, they've probably seen both. A little bit of the intended or deliberate strategy, but then things happen in life that put you in the path of an emergent strategy. So in your life, what did you set out early in your career to pursue?
So just to give a quick piece of background that gives context. I skied a year for the University of Utah, then I took a year off to try to make the national team, and that turned into 6 years. So I became a very non-traditional student very quickly, and that drove some of the intended and emergent strategies. But I had a very good friend of mine, Dr. Vern Cooley, who was good friends with Tom Rosenberg, and I always thought that I was going to go and do biomechanical engineering as an undergrad, and then go in and try and be an orthopedic surgeon. And I said to Vern all the time, you go out and you start the practice, and then I'll come join you. And that never happened. And the part of it was because of choices I made in my life to pursue ski racing, and I'll never know about it, but it's been a very interesting ride so far. So that's the background. And when I got back to school, I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people trying to figure out what direction to go, and it just felt like going into business, getting an MBA was going to be the path that I wanted to go on, so that's what I pursued.
So you mentioned earlier your father, of course, was a preeminent banker. As you're going through and outlining your career path or trying to figure out, what were his thoughts, or what was his advice during this time?
He used to ask me a couple of things, and he used to tell me a couple of things. One was, what do you want to manage? Do you want to manage people, or do you want to manage stocks? Because with a stock, if you don't like it, you just pick up the phone and you sell it. And it's very easy that way. If you want to manage people, then you end up in a situation where, whether they're having a baby, or whether there's a funeral, whether there's a divorce, or whether there's a tragedy, you have all of that coming to work, and you end up managing that. And I love people, and so I said I want to manage people. And so that was one of the things we talked about. The other thing was, he did an undergrad in business and then a master's in finance from Columbia. And he always said how he had wished that he had done a history undergrad, because it gives you such a great framework on how the world works together and why things happen. And so because of that advice, I pursued history as an undergrad, and it's really paid off. It gives you it gives you the ability to see a bigger picture.
So after pursuing your history degree and dabbling in the competitive skiing, what led you to your MBA at BYU?
Well, so I mentioned I did an undergrad in history, and I grew up in the home of a banker, and there were always a lot of questions that I had. You learn a lot of things sitting around the kitchen table, but there are a lot of things that I couldn't connect the dots yet. And I knew that I traveled a lot when I was ski racing over in Europe and around, and I saw people working in jobs that I knew I didn't want to do, and I knew that history probably wasn't going to be the degree that would keep me out of some of those jobs. And so I knew that an MBA was a requirement, and I always knew that I was going to go on and do that.
And so talk about your MBA experience. Did you concentrate on a specific area, finance or accounting?
I focused on finance, but again, that was an interesting, I would just say, I focused on finance because I felt like the soft skills I felt like I had an understanding of, and I just knew that was where I had my biggest gap with my undergrad, being in history and having taken 6 years off of school, and I had done all the math early on, but then after 6 years, you kind of, as you may recall from your first day in finance, you forget some of that, and you have to kind of relearn and adjust. So that's why I focused there.
I think the big question, did you have either of the Stice brothers?
No.
Oh, bummer. We have quite a few right now, the class of 2017 who's going through the accounting program, and I think we can agree that the Stice brothers, or at least Jim or Kay, make it a lot easier to understand accounting.
Well, maybe I'll have to go back and get my CPA.
It's entertaining.
I had Hal Heaton, and knowing the Socratic method, as I'm sure you do, you did not go to his class unprepared, ever.
Be ready to get called out on.
Ready to get called out at any moment.
So following you get your MBA, and then where do you proceed from there?
I think this skiing has always impacted my life in a dramatic way. When I was in my last year of my undergrad, I was asked to help with the U.S. national team. So I went overseas and worked with the speed guys and helped coach that season. And then I came back. I finished up school because I was going full time. I took 2 weeks off, and I went on to get my MBA. And remind me your question. I know that was an important context.
Yeah, so taking your MBA, where did you go from there?
Okay,
graduating.
So again, the reason why I give that background and the background about skiing was because I had my intended path, right? My intended strategy was to try to go to one of the coasts to work in banking, M&A or investment banking, because it's a slow growth industry, and so at some point you just have to learn You have to learn from the bottom up. It just takes time. There's nothing that can replace experience. And so that was the intention. And in my first year of my MBA, Dave Johnson came to me, and he was working for the Olympic Committee at the time, and started talking to me about working for the Olympic Committee, something that was not even on the radar, or if someone had mentioned it to me, I would have said, no, that would be silly for me to even think about that. In fact, I told him so. I said, there are about 5 other guys that I can tell you that can do the job, and the job was to go to Snow Basin and run all the competitions there and organize those events. And so over a course of a number of conversations and talking to some friends and mentors who said, what would you be doing if you were working in investment banking? What would you be doing if you worked for the Olympic Committee? And it became very clear that that was going to be an opportunity of a lifetime, that I shouldn't pass it up. And so I prayerfully made the decision, and then I moved forward a little bit blindly, hoping that it was going to work out. And so that's where I ended up.
So you mentioned working with the Olympic Committee. Who are some of the people that you interacted with, and what was their influence in your life at the time?
So when I started, I was about employee somewhere around 42, and there were a few guys that they'd pulled in some key players from specific industries, like guys that had put the Super Bowl on and built out venues and did planning. But after about year 2.5, and we had some challenges at the Olympic Committee, as you know, if you recall back at that time, they brought in Mitt Romney and Fraser Bullock, and they brought in another gentleman by the name of Herwig Demschar, who was my immediate boss, and I learned a lot from him. And I didn't work as close with Fraser and with Mitt, but I saw them quite a bit, and I was in meetings with them, and you learn a lot just by being around great people like that. But from Fraser, I learned he had a gift for interfacing with people and building consensus and building trust around projects. And if you can't do that, then you can't move anything forward in business or in life. So that was probably a good takeaway.
Appreciate that. So you're at the Olympic Committee working there, then what?
So a gentleman by the name of Sterling Jensen was at Wells Capital Management. He had been the head of First Security Investment Management. And in end of 2001, First Security merged with Wells Fargo. And at that point, Sterling took over the Wells Capital Management office, and I had been talking to him since 2001, 2002, and in late 2002, I started working at Wells Capital Management for Sterling.
And talk about your time at Wells Capital Management. You're going, of course, from the Olympics into a finance.
That was a dramatic change. We went from working in a bullpen in a very robust and really energetic group where there's a lot of noise and just a lot of activity, to working in a bank on the investment management side. It was like going from a football game into the library, and it was just very quiet. It's the best way I can describe it. It took me about a year to really figure out how to deal with just the silence, because I had been so used to working in this really boisterous and energetic group, and it was much different. So I was doing a lot of analytical things and working my way up, and then started managing some relationships. And after about 3.5, almost 4 years, I left Wells Cap to go pursue some other things.
And I think that leads us to GoEd.
Almost.
Tell us about the in-between.
The in-between was, I was leaving, we were going to form an investment management firm, and this will tie into the end of the story if you're still interested and not asleep. But I left, and we had talked about how to work with our family office and to create an investment management company to help pursue some of the things that we knew were critical for our family. And because of a number of things, we put that on hold, and I started investing directly in companies in venture capital and working with small startups, as well as helping manage the private equity fund and venture capital fund relationships that our family and some of the foundations that we are responsible for and have a relationship with. And so I did that for about 4.5 years, almost 5. And that led me to a period of time when Governor Huntsman was asked to become the ambassador of China. And at that moment, it meant, and it was right in 2008, and you'll recall what was happening in 2008. We were just entering into the Great Recession. And Bear Stearns had failed, and a number of other things had gone on. We had broken the buck on the money market, and we were in complete turmoil. And Governor Herbert was handed that bag, and he took it and threw it over his shoulder and started running with it. And there was a group of mine that we had been really concerned about what was the state of the state, where were we going, what was going to happen. And because of some of those conversations, it led to a meeting with the governor when he asked me if I would come run economic development for the state of Utah. And this was somewhere in 2009, probably late summer. And I felt, I was super busy. I really didn't have very much time. I felt like that was just something not on the radar screen. But I gave it a lot of thought, and one thing that kept coming back to me, there's never a convenient time to do public service. You'll never have a convenient time to do these types of things where you can actually make a big difference and be involved with something that's greater than yourself. And that was what was so great about the Olympics. It was this thing that was so much bigger than any one of us, and we had this definitive goal, and that was the same thing with the state. And this was a position where I felt like I could go in, and on a daily basis, our team could make a difference in a dramatic way for 2.9 million people. And I just thought that was going to be something where you'll never have a time when you have that opportunity. And so at some moments you have to step into the darkness on faith. But I will tell you that of all the big decisions I've made in my life, there was never one that I was more sure about than that decision. So that was kind of a neat thing for me.
I know I moved up here 3 years ago from San Diego, and went to work for Gene Levinson, who you're familiar with. And that's where I first learned about GoEd and some of the interesting. So I want to share this with the audience and then ask you a couple questions. During your tenure, GoEd facilitated the expansion or relocation of different companies, large companies in Utah's urban and rural counties. This is the interesting part, though. Companies that are projected to create more than almost 33,000 jobs and $2.1 billion in state revenue over the next decade. That's staggering. And so going from Wells Capital, the Olympics, to Wells Capital Management, then to GoEd, and to be able to carry that out, how did you do it? What was your initial vision, and then how did you execute on that?
When I started working with the Olympics, and you've all been faced, I'm sure, with something that just was really daunting, something that just was overwhelming. How am I going to do this? And I learned something very important during the games that I applied to my time at GoEd, and that was I learned that I work best if I can simplify a task. And so what I did was, when I thought Olympics, what do I have to do to do this job? Because fear is always the biggest obstacle that we face when we're trying to kind of expand ourselves. And I said, okay, we have to make a plan, we have to refine the plan, and we have to execute on the plan. And how we're going to be measured is we're going to prepare for the games, we're going to execute the games, and we're going to have a legacy. And the legacy will be what we're truly measured by. And we were able to execute on all those things. So when the Governor's Office of Economic came about, the first thing I tried to do was just simplify that. And you get your head around it, but you say, what is it that we need to do? And I carry this still. Actually, I always carry two because I used to give one away. But we created a card, and it was something, you all worked at organizations where there's a mission statement and maybe some objectives. And some organizations do that better than others. Some, they just hand you a card or give you some sort of kickoff, and then you never hear about it again. And to make these things really work, you have to talk about it all the time, and you have to push every idea through that filter. And so we created the governor's vision that Utah will lead the nation as the best performing economy and be recognized as a premier global business destination. And then we created 4 objectives that touched on the 4 areas. But, that pushed us, and that was what gave us direction. And everybody on my team, even those that were outside, carried this card. And I would corner them walking down the hall or during a staff meeting. We would reward them, we would berate them with love if they didn't have it or if they couldn't remember it. But it really is something that you have to live, and what that speaks to is culture. And so when you say, how did we accomplish those things? First of all, we were facilitated by the state being in a very good position, and that takes long-term leadership. It also takes a great leader, and Governor Herbert was there and supported us in everything we needed. And then the legislature, the big fear I had was the legislature would take their foot off the gas, when at that time I knew this was a buyer's market. And because the state was so well positioned, even though it was a difficult time, we were well positioned to acquire a lot of businesses. And when I say acquire, think about your own business. If you have a company that's in a good financial position and you come into an economic downturn that won't occur for another 100 years, we hope, and you have the wherewithal and what we call dry powder, as you're coming out of that recession or that downturn, you can go out and you can start picking up business. And that's exactly what we did. So when the governor asked me, although it was a big risk, and as you recall, March of 2009, we hit a low in the stock market, and that's when we broke the buck. And August of 2009 wasn't too far from that period. And I just saw it as a real opportunity. I thought that we could do that. And so we took the tools that we were given by the legislature, and we put our pedal down to the floor. And one of the things that I did was I went out and I took the team we had, and those that moved on, I filled those slots with incredible people. And the reason why we were able to attract those people, because we can't pay a lot, right? But I was able to attract those people from the private sector was because I used to say to them, there's never a convenient time to give public service. And this is a period in time, this is a dot in time that will create a great definition about you, and will give you opportunity to pursue something and have an impact in individual lives on a daily basis. And so with that kind of hiring process, I was able to get some of the best and the brightest. And if the conversation was about money when we started, I knew I didn't have the right person. And it sounds strange, but it is in many ways, it is service. It is almost volunteer work. These were people that were making, some from the senior executive team, 6 figures and deep into the 6 figures, and they were coming in and they were taking a big haircut. And so when you find the right people that can buy into a mission and that really care and that are united in that mission, there's nothing in this world that you can't do. And so with that, people were working more hours than they should have ever worked, and they were sacrificing more of their family than they should have ever done. But because of that effort, we were able to have that success. But again, the final epitaph to that whole thing is it's about team. It's about team, and team means people working together. It's about trust, and trust is integrity, competency, and follow through. And we work to develop people and push people and bring them along. And I hope that people that worked with us, that they felt like they got something out of it more than just kind of a paycheck. Because if those people we didn't want. It's about 2.9 million people, and now it's going to be about another 3 million people in the next 25 years. So hopefully we'll be prepared for that too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's obviously a tremendous learning for everybody here going through a difficult time. I mean, like you say, there's that point in time that you really have an opportunity, and it's really your perspective and how you look at it. I know that again, referring back to my boss, that building consensus, which you learned from your mentors, sounds like it really led into that, and you being successful in that role.
It helped a lot. Yeah, thank you.
So you just recently, within the last year or so, year and a half, left GoEd.
Uh-huh.
And why don't you go ahead and talk to us briefly about Cynosure Group?
Sure. So when I started with the governor, I knew that I needed to do at least 4 years or so, and it was almost 5, and it takes that much time to get there. And so at around year 5, I knew that was going to be the time to step off and let somebody else fill the void and kind of put some fresh blood into the governor's office. And at that point, though, harking all the way back, if you recall, over a decade ago, we talked about creating an investment management firm. And so somewhere in the latter part of my working at Go Ahead and knowing that I was going to be stepping out, my brother-in-law, who had been with Davis Polk in New York and then with the Treasury, he was the Undersecretary of the Treasury for 6 years, and then he was at Carlisle for 7, he was coming home with my sister for the first time in years. And then a gentleman by the name of Bud Scruggs, who had been at Leucadia for 12 years, he was coming home. He was working with a company called Fortescue in Australia. It ended up being the 4th largest iron ore mining company in the world. And I was finishing. So this confluence was occurring, and we started in earnest pursuing creating a private equity company and a wealth advisory company. And really, the first focal point is, if we create it for what we need, we think that there will be others who will need that kind of service as well. And so that's where we started, and that's what we're doing. And the private equity group is not a traditional fund structure. It's more like a fundless sponsor with assets that are available, but that we don't charge a fee on until they're invested. And so that's our model. We're trying to do it in a different way than what's been built out over years, in much more of an institutional manner than what we want to do. And so we look to hold things long term, whereas traditional private equity, LBO type stuff, leveraged buyout groups, they have to sell the companies or the assets they acquire within range, but it's usually on average around 5 years. And the reason they have to do that is because that's how you pay your investment professionals. And so but for us, we want to, David Eccles, and this harks back to the name of the Cynosure Group. Cynosure was the name of the ship that my great-grandfather came across the ocean on from Liverpool, England. He was from Scotland. He came across with a perpetual immigration fund, and it means North Star. So again, for me, it's always thematic. Who do you want to be? What are the values of your organization? What values do you want to espouse, and what values do you want the organization you work with to have? And so on our investment strategy, we hark back to David and to Mariner. And it takes a long time to build a great company. And so we're in it for the long haul, and we're investing in companies that we want to be involved with for a long time. And therefore, cash flow is important, and dividends are important, and those are important to individuals as well as the foundations. And there's more I can talk about on that, but I'll let you ask your next question.
Yeah, we appreciate that. So those who are thinking of starting their companies and you're looking for a name, go back to the ships that your ancestors came on, and you can have at least a point of reference. So we talked briefly last week about sharing some about faith and family. I want to read a quote, and then we'll talk about this. This is from Elder Bednar in teaching about the multi-generational families concept. The basic purpose of all we teach and all we do in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to make available the priesthood authority and gospel ordinances and covenants that enable a man and a woman and their children to be sealed together and be happy at home. Period. Exclamation point. End of sentence. That's it. And so if you wouldn't mind talking briefly, tell us about your wife and your children, names, ages.
Yeah, so my wife's name's Christine. I can't tell you her age, but I'm a little bit older, and I'm not making that part up like I have to with my sisters. But I've got 3 kids, and one is almost 14. Her name's Clara. And then I've got Mary, and then I have Spencer, and he's 4. So we have kind of a big gap. And I think I'll talk a little bit about what Elder Bednar says, but I think one of the key things in life is first getting to the point and realizing and accepting that we're not in charge. And as you can see with my life, on a positive way, it has evolved in this very meandering path. But when I look back, and I look at each experience that I've had, it seems like each one has prepared me for and given me kind of the framework or the tools that have enabled me to do the next job, if that makes sense. And it's built on each other. But, when we think about the gospel in our lives, and I think also there are 2 components. There's a temporal component of the gospel, and And then there's the spiritual component. And when you think back on those two areas, there's really no difference between the two. They really blur right into one another. And I'll give you the easiest example that I can think of. One is the word of wisdom. On the one hand, it's a temporal commandment, right? We don't drink, we don't smoke, and we take care of our body. We put good food in it. And if we do that physically, mortally, we'll be healthier. And we'll actually be happier. We won't be addicted to things. On a spiritual basis, it enables us to have a clear mind. It teaches us obedience. It prevents us from having addiction, which addiction kind of blocks us from pursuing kind of a clarity of thought and having the Spirit with us. And I think that you can drill down on a lot of other types of commandments. And it's what Elder Holland talks about are the evidences of the Book of Mormon or the evidences of the gospel. And those evidences are things where if you have kind of questions, you can look to that. Like, we're supposed to be virtuous in our thoughts, right? We're supposed to be chaste, and we're supposed to have fidelity to our spouses. And if we do that, then we have more calm in our lives, right? That's temporal blessing. And we have more happiness. I think studies have shown you live longer when you're able to have that kind of calm. Your heart's better. There's a lot of things. So you see these spiritual commandments that require you to have faith, but then you can look to the real evidences of keeping those commandments, keeping those commandments that really give you peace and happiness and give you the ability to actually be healthy professionally, right? If things are going well in your personal life, you're much more productive at work. And I know that from a personal, just from a personal basis. When I have a disagreement with my wife, I am not as focused at work as I can be. And so I would say, with that as a backdrop, coming to what Elder Bednar says, if indeed our number one goal in life is to return to the presence of our Father in heaven, and we're pursuing that, but yet we have to live in this temporal world and compete and put bread on the table and be self-sufficient and have time to help others, then all the principles of helping build our Father in heaven's kingdom on the earth are really important, both because our end goal is to return to our Father in heaven, but the only way we can get there is by keeping the commandments, by helping others, by building His kingdom, by helping others be worthy of the priesthood in their homes. And I mean that in a very holistic sense, because oftentimes when we think priesthood, we think just men, but really the priesthood extends itself well beyond men to women. And one think only of the temple, and one think about the fact that any organization in the church operates under the authority of the priesthood, both men's organizations, women's organizations. So I think there's a reason why that Elder Bednar would say that's the most important thing we do.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. We're out of time, but in parting, one piece of advice or counsel for the group, what would you say?
One piece. That's really tough. I would say Elder Oaks has a great talk called Timing.
Yes.
And you love that too. Hey, once you read it, you'll love it. My coach from Norway, I worked with a coach for about 4 years from Norway. He said, the plan is that we have a plan, and the plan is that nothing ever goes according to the plan. And if you read Elder Oaks' talk, it's very much the same thing, and it speaks about anchoring. We talked about a lot of things. In business, you anchor yourself to kind of a mission, a path, and some objectives of how you're going to measure and what you're going to pursue. Elder Oaks puts a fine point on that and punctuates that concept by saying, really, what you need to do is, if you center your life on the Savior, if you anchor your life there, then no matter what changes, what hardship you have or what successes you have, you're always going to be able to be held there. And when I think about an anchor, and I think about it hooking itself to a boat, always an anchor will enable that boat to turn into the challenge, right? The obstacle, which are the waves blowing at it and pushing it. And so it can face those head on. And when you center your life on the Savior, no matter what goes on in your life, no matter what career you choose to have, that's a portable skill, or that's a portable gift that you take with you everywhere. And if you take care of just that one thing and just start there, right? If you're not sure about other things, just start there and work your way out from there. If you do that and do it successfully, and I've found when I'm successful at it, which is not always, but I try to pursue that and I have greater peace, and that would be the one thing I would say.
Thank you very much. I think, Brad, you're going to see maybe some mission statements changing over the next couple of days. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, I'm honored, and thanks for taking your time.